Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Jarrell Mason, aka J Mace, and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Album Cover, where we get inside the entertainment industry with those in the know and give them their flowers while they're here to be celebrated. With me right now, I have a gentleman who is a native of the volunteer state of Tennessee. He is one of the many people responsible for getting the museum for the late great Tina Turner done out in Brownsville, Tennessee, which is about a little less than 30 minutes from the hometown of Nutbush, where Tina Turner was raised. It's just a stone's throw. So we're going to get into all of that, Miss Turner's legacy, and talk about his career in radio and education. I was in both of those careers myself. So we're going to have a good time chatting with my good friend, Mr. Keith Gambill. Mr. Gambill, welcome to Beyond the Album Cover, sir. How are you?
I'm fine and glad to be here, Jarrell. Thanks for having me on this time.
No problem. And I appreciate Rashawn Chisholm, aka the professor of the Professionals Lounge, for linking us up and making this interview happen. What's up, Rashawn? I appreciate it. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Tell the people a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in the radio business first.
Okay, well, I'm a native of Brownsville, Tennessee. That's in Haywood County. That's the county seat of where, Haywood County's county seat is Brownsville. Nutbush is 10 miles outside of Brownsville. I was born and raised there. My childhood ambition was to be a disc jockey. All I ever wanted to really do was to be on the radio. So when I graduated from high school, I went off to Memphis State University and I studied broadcasting, communication, radio, TV, and theater arts. And I got a call when I was 18 from the guy that owned the radio station. He says, "Would you like to come up and do a weekend show?" And so that's how I got started in radio. It was interesting the show that I was doing at that time, which I can tell you more about whenever you'd like for me to.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, back then, Brownsville radio station played country music. They did a show called Swap Shop where they call in and do, items and people buy them and so forth. And they had a show on Friday and Saturday night called The Soul Show. And this is where, they play rhythm and blues. Well, I wanted to play rhythm and blues. And at that time in the mid 80s in Brownsville, there weren't many people of my shade of color that had done that in that town, but that's what I wanted to do. And so I'd grown to love R&B music as a 3-year-old child, listening to the Supremes. My aunt had bought me all these records and everything. So I said to myself, as a young boy, I want to do that. I want to be on the air, and I want to play R&B because it was exciting back then. We had the Jackson Five, we had all of these blossoming artists coming through the 70s with a real sound of R&B. So it came true. I got to do the Soul Show. Now, how I got into Tina is what I can get into whenever you want me to, unless you want me to talk more about my background in Brownsville.
All right, so just want to go into the radio thing for a little bit for people. Like I stated earlier, I was in radio myself. So you mentioned the show Swap Shop. Well, at the radio station where I used to work at in North Carolina, we called it Tradio, where we have people call in and they'll say, "Hey, I'm selling this for this much," or "I want to buy this for this much," and they will call in, and it almost kind of sounded like the station that you were working on at the time. You said they were primarily a country format, but on weekends they would have a specialty show. Now that was common back in the 70s, 80s, and further back, where a station would be formatted for a particular genre during the day and
Mhm.
maybe would do specialty programming on weekends only if your station wasn't fully dedicated to a specific format.
Right. And that Soul Show, they did it on Friday night, like from 10 to midnight, and Saturday, 10 to midnight. And the way I got started with the radio station, this girl was doing a remote up at a Sonic Drive-In, and I was just riding around. I got out of the car and walked up to her and introduced myself. I was about 18 years old, and she started letting me come out and watch her show in the studio, which she really wasn't supposed to do. And sometimes she'd sneak and let me do the weather forecast. And so I it just got all in my blood, and something I wanted to do ever since I was a small boy.
Yeah, I remember those days running board out for remotes. When you're starting on the ground floor in radio, at least back in the time when we came in, you pretty much got your start running the board for remotes. If you had syndicated shows running, they needed somebody to come in. Local high school sports you would run, and maybe you would be a swing person on a certain station if a jock called out.
Right. And back then we had to put the actual vinyl on the turntable. So we didn't have a countdown clock telling us how many seconds that we had to intro the song or anything. We had to know the music. So actually, we had to buy our own music. The station didn't buy it. So I spent out of my own pocket, and I'd get the music in Memphis and take it back home 60 miles to Brownsville and put it on the radio. And so, queuing up a record, and man, that's what a DJ used to be on there. You didn't have a countdown clock. You had to know the intro. So the knowledge level that DJs had back then, not knocking what they've got today, um, it's a whole lot. It's a whole lot that we had to do.
So you really had to know how to hit that post.
Oh yeah, you had to splice your commercials. You'd have to take your tape, and splice, cut the tape, actual tape. The commercials were on cartridges. There wasn't all this computerized stuff. It was more of the DJ ad-libbing, knowing what to do, and all of that.
Thank God I bypassed the car era because I would have messed up plenty of commercials cutting in the production studio because you really had to have a steady hand with that blade. And if you cut the wrong part of the tape, you were through. And it was a
Right.
long process for maybe one or two edits where you could do with a couple of clicks and a delete in the computer. But back then, you had to load it up onto the reel. You had to use the bulk eraser to erase your cart because
Yep.
be like the process of pre-saving television shows. You would wipe the carts because you had to reuse it and then cut it, and it was a whole lot of work that you really had to do in the analog days.
And like what it would be like, you wouldn't just be sitting there looking at a clock. You'd be queuing this record up on the left, queuing this record up on the right, grabbing 5 or 6 carts out of a rack that's rolling, sticking them in the machine. Some of them are supposed to trip the other one to play, and some of them wouldn't trip. So you'd have to sit there with your hand on the button. You'd be answering the phone, going to the AP machine, pulling off the news. It was just, you were the whole 9 yards, the DJ was.
Yeah, that was when you all were getting presses off the wire. Now, at this time, was the station full 24 hours where you had jocks coming in 24/7, or was it parts of the day where it was automated and you had that cart carousel rolling and hoping and praying that the engineer didn't get that late night call saying that the cart carousel tapped out?
We had all kind of problems with that happening, and it was just a cut off at midnight station, 7 days a week.
Back in the days when you signed off.
Yeah.
Yeah, back when you used to get that message where they'd be like, station WWWW is signing off for another broadcast day. Then they'll give you the kilowatts and city of license and the seal of good practice and the national anthem, and then it will be dead.
But we were bad boys. Sometime me and the other guy and girl that did the show, we'd stay on a little after 12 because we knew the owner was asleep. But he's not listening, I don't think so.
But I want to ask you this: did y'all have a red phone in the booth?
No red phone that I remember.
Yeah, if you worked in radio, you know about that red phone, and you knew only one person had access to that phone, and it wasn't to call you and say, "Hey, how you doing?"
I've heard that talked about, but I don't remember that we had one right there where I was. But I've heard
Yeah,
that talked.
yeah, because I remember hearing from some older radio friends that I knew, they were saying that some PDs and GMs were so obsessed with their station that they would literally call the red phone almost every hour on the hour, or be in their office constantly monitoring the station, listening for the jocks breaks, making sure that they don't go a minute past the talk break, make sure they hit the beds at the appropriate time, and just really sticklers for being a tight formatted station.
Exactly. Yeah, those were the days. I mean, and of course, all that changed when it become computerized and automated. I haven't been in the studio since then, so I moved on from Brownsville Radio and went to another station.
And what station was that? Did you move to?
I went to Jackson, Tennessee, and worked for. You may have heard of Denise LaSalle, Queen of the Blues,
Of course.
Superwolf, James Superwolf, her husband. They owned a station called Kicks 96 WFKX. And it was an urban station. I did a 7 to midnight show for about 3 or 4 years, late 80s to early 90s. That was my last stint
Wow.
in radio.
Wow, yeah, because when I was looking up prior to the interview, I was looking up that the current format for 96 Kicks is Urban AC. So was it Urban AC at the time when you were at the station, or was it another format and then later flipped?
It was urban. I think that, yeah, AC was included in it. It was urban. It was
Okay.
the only urban station in Jackson at that time. It was just the only one, that was urban.
Well, and how far is Memphis from Jackson?
About 90 miles.
90 miles. So I'm sure probably right around that area, you probably couldn't pick up K97 or any of the other Memphis stations because it was kind of like on the fringe of the
Right.
Memphis
You
market.
can get it. Some people can get it in Jackson and some couldn't.
So it just depended on where you were at or how you had the boombox or the radio set in the house and the antenna set all the way up with some foil.
Yeah. Yes, right. That's right. But
Yes.
that was go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was saying this was back in the days before digital tuning, where you really had to be a skilled handed person to make sure that that position on that dial was perfect. The antenna was up at the right spot, and you pretty much had clear reception depending on where you were at. Now, I'm curious to know, since Memphis was about maybe 90 miles or so from right around Brownsville, were you influenced heavy at all by anything that was coming out of Stax?
Not really, because when I was listening to music, it was the early 70s, late 60s. And the way I got into the music was my aunt would go in Brownsville to a record store called Hess Record Shop. It's just a one man record store. And she would buy the Supreme albums, bring them home, put them on the old stereo, get up and dance. And from there, I wanted the Jackson 5. And so what I was doing is I would go in the local record shop, Mr. Hess's record shop at that time. I couldn't have been more than 5, 6 years old. My grandmother would drive me up. I'd go in there and I'd say, Mr. Hess, the Jacksons have out a new song. I haven't heard of it. I said, oh, yeah, I've heard it on this station or whatever. You need to order that. So he would order the record. It would come in and he would pick me up and hold me up, and I'd go up to the top shelf and place the records up there on the shelf. So that's how I got rolling into rhythm and blues music and enjoying it so much. And I kept up with it. I kept up with it. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So pretty much you were heavy Motown, but it should not be understated, people, the influence of Stax Records and R&B. Because when I went to Memphis a couple years ago for the vacation, I made sure to tell my wife we are going to go to the Stax Museum. So we
Yeah.
ended up going there, going to the Rock and Soul Museum, and then we actually made a visit to Reverend Al Green's church. And lucky enough, he was there that Sunday and preached. And I was trying my hardest not to fanboy in the front row of the church.
Yeah. I hear you. I've been to Stax before. It's incredible. Incredible experience.
Yeah, it definitely is, especially seeing Isaac Hayes' Cadillac and all of the memorabilia, and just knowing the legacy of Stax and of Memphis in general, because with WDIA, Rufus Thomas, Carla Thomas, BB King, and of course Sun Records with Elvis and everything Sam Phillips and everybody did out of there, and what was later to come with 3-6 Mafia and what they're doing, what they did for hip hop in Memphis, 8 Ball and MJG, and just how Memphis, we can make so many direct connections to hip hop, rock, soul, R&B, and also wrestling connection too, because you got your Great Smoky Mountain Wrestling, which was like East Tennessee, Western North Carolina. Then Memphis, they had its own wrestling association going on, and I believe Jeff Jarrett's dad ran that And this was, of course, back in the days when wrestling was territorial, where all the different regions of the country had their own territories. And then, of course, Vince McMahon came in and said, hey, we're going to take it from regional to national. And that was when WWE and everything else came after that exploded.
Exactly. You're right.
Right. So let's talk about really quick. You mentioned that you went to Memphis State University, now University of Memphis. What was it like going there? And tell me about your experience going there.
Well, I thought I was in the big city, and I was because I'd never been out of Brownsville. So I really enjoyed going to Memphis State. It was 1982 to 86. And that's when I met, so to speak, my life sort of intersected with Tina's, which I can get into that at any time you're ready.
Go ahead.
Okay. So when I was 16 years old in Brownsville, I was a sophomore, and I was working for a summer youth program called Rabies Control, where we would check for vaccination. And we were in Nutbush, and we walked in this man's house. I didn't know who it was till later on. And I asked him, to see his vaccination papers. And I saw this lady's picture on the table. She had long, flowing black hair, high cheekbones, pretty skin. And I said, who is that lady? And he said, oh, that's my cousin, Tina Turner. Well, it didn't register with me because I'd heard her name mentioned at that time, but it would be 4 years later when I was 20, driving around on the Memphis State campus, and the DJ was playing Let's Stay Together. And the song got to the end, and he said, that's Tina Turner from Brownsville, Tennessee. I said, wait a minute. That's the lady whose picture I saw in her first cousin's house, the late Joe Melvin Curry. And then I said, wow, we got a famous person from Brownsville, and I'm going to get to go home and play the music on the radio. And this feeling come over me like I was the most excited thing in the planet. So I would go out to Cat's record store in Memphis and buy the vinyl Private Dancer album, buy all of her 12 inches, take them back home to Brownsville, plop them on the air. And that's where things started rolling. And the things I heard in my ear from the community are good and bad. Would you like for me to share some of those in a minute?
Yeah, and I want to make this point really quick. You mentioned the Private Dancer album and how prior to that album, I believe Tina was doing pretty much kind of like the indie golden oldie circuit, doing some of the hits that she did when she was with Ike. And then it wasn't until she linked up with Martin Ware and his partner of BF. Martin Ware was formerly of Human League and Heaven 17, and they were responsible for the covers of Ball of Confusion and Let's Stay Together, and how it kind of incorporated what was new at the time, the synth pop new wave movement that was going on in the UK. And smartly enough, her manager said, no, we're not going to take her to a US label and say, this is Tina Turner. We're just going to follow the wave that's going on in the UK and then just follow Duran Duran, Adam Ant, and all of those acts that was coming over to America, getting played on MTV. And we're just going to ride that and show that, hey, this is already moving units in the UK. And because everything coming out of there is white hot at the time, we're just going to ride that wave and pretty much make the US labels want to do business with us.
That's right. That's right. So
and I got a funny story for you real quick before you go into your point. I was looking up a story about Martin Ware because he was reflecting on Tina Turner and the making of that, since her passing, and how originally the Ball of Confusion cover was supposed to have been for Soul Brother Number One, Godfather of Soul, the hardest working man in show business, the late great James Brown. But what ended up happening was at the 11th hour, he said, I want points on the whole album, not just the song. And that just nixed that, and that's how they ended up getting Tina on the project.
I didn't know that. That's an interesting fact.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. And for those of you that don't know, music industry lingo, points are valuable. And if you get points on an album, you're gonna eat good, especially if the album is a big hit. It's like making money while you sleep, just like Michael Jordan is doing
Yeah.
forever in perpetuity because of those shoes. Now you go ahead and make your point.
Yeah. Well, to go on and tell you the whole story, I have to tell it the way it is. I want your listeners to hear it all. So when I was there in Brownsville in '82 playing her music, my first thought was everybody's going to be very excited that I'm playing Tina on the R&B show, what was called the Soul Show. Well, I would get calls, and some people would request her songs and make positive comments, and then I'd get a lot of people calling, "Hey, man, take her off. We want to hear Freddie Jackson, man. Me and my lady doing this, and uh, she ain't bumping. She ain't hit. She's singing this rock music, and she's okay." Okay, so I was getting some of that in one ear, and there was a lot worse. I was getting a lot in the other ear, racial stuff. Okay, I was getting all these comments coming in from the community, and I would say maybe 30% were positive and 70% were negative. And this is from all backgrounds of people that live in that, town that would call me. So something on the inside said, Keith, get in your car, go around and drive in the county and see if there's any sign or anything up that says Tina Turner was even from here. I did that, didn't see anything. I said, I'm going to do something to change that. And fire lit in me. And the more people would talk about her or put her down, which they did, and I can tell you some of the things they said, which weren't very nice. And there were some positives, don't get me wrong. But it was that negative that I heard that made me sort of stand up in her place and say, she's going to be honored in this town no matter what. And so I became what was like, to some people, obsessed with it. Okay. And that's fine, that people thought of it that way. I had to take it and push it hard to keep her name out there. It took me 9 years from '84 to '93 to get the first festival started. And I wasn't the only one that helped. But what I'm trying to say, Jarrell, it wasn't a cakewalk from '84 to '93. There was lots of people that didn't want Tina to be honored. Okay.
Wow.
I had the Atlanta Journal-Constitution come to town. I had other newspapers come to town, and they would ask the leaders, what's the problem? And of course, they would give them their reasons. But I was determined, even without her permission, without the head people's position in the town, something was going to be done to honor Tina. And that took place in 1993. It took me 9 years, but I kept her name out in front of the community. Played those songs despite people wanting to hear, more R&B music, which hers was R&B, but you get my point. Some of it, like Show Some Respect on the album, and some of the, Steel Claw, that's rock and roll. All right, so she was not going to be put in a box, okay, for any segment of society. She was going to stay true to her art form. I fed off of her music. I fed off of her lyrics. It became more than just being a fan. It became, I'm fighting against a lot of isms in the
Right.
town.
Right. And being from the South, I know all about those isms all too well. And as you and I know, the music industry, of course, race records, R&B. So look at Little Richard doing Tutti Frutti, Pat Boone covering it. Elvis did Hound Dog. It was originally done, I believe, Big Mama Thornton. And of course, as you and I know, we like to put everything in
Mm-hmm.
boxes. You can't cross this line. You got to be here. You can't go there. And Tina, she identified primarily on the rock side because if you listen to her work and then the work that she and Ike did, it was very rock heavy. Then of course them later working on with Phil Spector on River Deep Mountain High. I'm sure those are records that got played on Top 40 AM, and really the soul station's like, this ain't black enough for us. I'm just gonna go in and call it like I call it. But
Yeah.
as you know, with the music industry, you know, we got to put you in this box, and if you go outside of that,
Mm-hmm.
something is wrong with that. Just like how when Whitney Houston came out, you know, not a lot of people identified her as pure R&B, because Clive Davis's marketing strategy was, we're gonna appeal her to the pop audience. And then when she got booed at the 87 Soul Train Music Awards, that was when Clive knew, like, okay, we're gonna have to win back the R&B audience. And that's why he went and got Ellie and Babyface to do her I'm Your Baby Tonight album in 89.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you make some very good points and connections there with what I was saying, and all of that goes in the same area. Um, of course, she was R&B to the extent with What's Love Got to Do with It, Better Be Good to Me, but it's gradually leaving from that, into rock and rock. She had rock on that album, Steel Claw. She had rock on Break Every Rule. She had R&B on it. She charted. But the fact is, she was ultimately on the edge, and she would not be boxed in. And just what you said, where do we put her? Where do we put this song? It's not what they would say black enough. It's not white enough, and it was just ridiculous to me. Because she was an artist who was unique and would not deviate from being herself, which turned out the way it did.
Right. Right. And you mentioned 1993 was when the festival took place. And I believe that was the same year when What's Love Got to Do with It came out. And that was based on the book. I believe the book was titled I, Tina, and it was written by Kurt Loder. Yes, people, that
Mhm.
Kurt Loder, before he went to MTV, he was over at Rolling Stone, wrote that book, and then the book got adapted into What's Love Got to Do with It. And then it later launched the careers of Angela Bassett, and of course Lawrence Fishburne. And I was wondering, was Miss Turner aware of what was going on with what you were doing? Did you end up getting an endorsement for either her directly or someone within the camp?
Yes, what happened is I met a lady named Sharon Norris who owned her own company called Nutbush Heritage Productions around 1992. She had her own business, a for profit business. We got together and we got this school in Nutbush behind the gym, not the school she went to, another school. Painted it, cleaned it up. We set up flatbed trailers as music stages. We had vendors, live entertainment. We had our own Tina that dressed up and did a show. We had a makeshift museum where we put our things together and had a museum. And Tina was aware of it because Sharon had informed her, and she said she was all right with us doing it. I didn't hear that from her, but I was told that by Sharon. And Sharon, I know that she got in touch with her. But it took 9 years before it happened. And I stood in some places similar to what Tina stood in, looking around. And when I would hear the song like Break Every Rule, it was like I was breaking some rules too. And I pushed and pushed. And in 93, we had the first one in Nutbush in that school. We had like 500 people. And the sheriff had to come out and direct traffic, which Nutbush is like 50 to 150 people, and it's an unincorporated town. We kept having festivals in the 90s, 94, 95, 97, 98. And I don't want to jump too far without you jumping in, but I'm chronologically building up to the museum coming to Brownsville. I'm giving you all the pre stuff before her school was turned into a museum.
So these festivals were kind of like the seeds that later led to what is now the museum, correct?
Exactly. And they were put together by myself and Sharon Dole Norris. And the chamber wasn't involved, the mayor, no, none of the townspeople were directly involved in doing this. It was a grassroots thing. We were determined, and we actually put the first sign in the ground that said Nutbush, Tennessee, home of Tina Turner. The sign that's hanging over the Nutbush store was put up by Sharon, who I work with. It's still hanging on top of the Nutbush store. So we felt like she needed her flowers in 93. We didn't want to wait till now. So we did that. We did that.
Yeah, I say this all the time. You give people their flowers while they're here, and you mentioned that it was all grassroots, nobody from the city or any other big wigs backing. How did you all fund the project? Was it a lot of crowdsourcing, a lot of angel investments as far as raising funds?
Well, Sharon had her own business, and she had some money. She owned property in Nutbush. She's from there. I took some of my own money and laminated posters and helped pay for some display cases and paint. It was just totally us, you know, totally us.
Definitely DIY, do it yourself.
Yeah, we had a few people come and help us, volunteering that we knew, but we just said we're just gonna do the darn thing, we're just gonna do it, and here it is. We're gonna honor somebody, and we're not gonna listen to all you people telling us we got to do this, we got to wait on this, and all of that.
And I
So,
was wondering, before she ended up becoming a Swiss citizen and living in Switzerland until her passing, did she ever come back to Nutbush or the surrounding areas, or was it more of like, doesn't really come back as much, and you may not even hear it if she's in town?
it's rumored that she came back in the early 80s. I can't prove it. It's rumored. And then it's rumored that she came back in the mid 2000s, but I can't prove it. So I can't answer that. I can say probably, as far as I know, she hasn't, but I've heard family members and people say she snuck back. So
Mm.
take it,
Can't
take it.
confirm nor deny.
All right. I mean, it's like somebody said they saw a limousine pull up one day out there in Nutbush. It was a long white limousine, and they speculated it was her. So,
Yep, so it's all hearsay at that point, just like when you have your local sitting out at the corner store early on Saturday mornings, right after they go get their biscuit from Hardee's, sitting around shooting the breeze. And like, if you're from the South, you know how Hardee's is on Saturday mornings with the
uh-huh.
senior crowd. And they're like, hey, I heard Tina Turner came to so-and-so. No, you
Yeah,
didn't, Jim. Man, yes, I did. While you sitting there drinking your knee-high soda out of a glass and eating a moon pie.
yeah. And then everybody in Brownsville, a lot of folks, oh, she's my cousin. Oh, she went to school with my mama. Oh, I know her. I know Tina. Oh, yes, she used to do that. And then when you get to talking to them, they can't tell you hardly anything else. So you question, the validity of some of that.
Yeah, it's like one big game of telephone where everything gets lost into translation. And then,
Uh-huh.
with where were you when you got the news that she passed?
Don't let me forget to jump back to 99 in a minute, but I'm going to
Okay,
go
we're
ahead and
gonna
tell
go
you that.
there. We're gonna go back to that after this.
Okay. I'm a teacher. The last day of school was Wednesday, May 25th, I believe. We had a half a day of school. That morning, on my way to work, I posted Nutbush City Limits by Tina on YouTube. And I put a caption above it, and it said, "Take me to 19 one more time." Well, I didn't think anything about it because I post Tina all the time. I played it, was jamming in the car, feeling good, last day of school. And she probably had passed in Switzerland because time is different, but I didn't know. I got home. It's about 2:37 p.m. Central, sitting at this table. I had a salad, getting ready to eat it. Phone rang. Family member. Are you okay? I said, yeah, I'm okay. What's up? Have you heard? I said, heard what? Tina Turner passed away. So that's how I got the news. And I was like, I can't, it was just like the world started coming in on me. And I was like, oh, I want to reach out there, and I'm trying to find out, when it happened, how it happened. Um, Phone messages started coming in from people that have been members of my fan club on Facebook that have followed me for 39 years that I have self promoted Tina. It was overwhelming. And it kept me busy for like a whole week just trying to go back and forth and keep up with everything. It was sad and unexpected so quickly.
Yeah, it was sad when I heard the news, and then of course all the tributes began to pour in from celebrities and well fans of hers. And I believe my wife was telling me last week, Oprah was on CBS this morning and was talking about, I guess her and Tina Turner became close after Oprah told her when she initially interviewed Tina Turner that I was a fan of yours, and they became really close. And Oprah was saying how she was really going through some things towards the end, and I was surprised at how close to the death everybody around her circle kept what was going on, with her, because once she left to go to Switzerland, it was where she pretty much went off grid, and that, she was really, privately, going through some things.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're bringing up thoughts as you speak, and one of them that you brought up is I want people to understand that for many years, I was the only source of news about Tina Turner in that county. I would put articles in the newspaper. So I just kept it up as a hobby. I did it on the radio when Facebook came on. I post Tina. I give Tina news. That's just a part of me. And it hit me hard. I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. She had been sick a very long time, but it was a shock, and we can see the magnitude of what she left very clearly. It's like hardly no other.
Yeah, and you could make a lineage from all the women that came after, because if you look at Beyonce, her stage show, her stage presence, very much she went to the school of Tina
Mm-hmm.
and paid
That's right.
homage to her at the Kennedy Center Honors when Tina got honored, and I think she did a performance with her at the Grammys. And that's the one thing about Beyonce and a lot of acts like her that have appreciation for those who paved the way for them, and they're standing on their shoulders to have their success. And I was glad to see that everybody, ended up showing much love and respect to her, while she was here, especially
Mhm.
with that Tina doc that came out 2 years ago. And I believe that was her last US public appearance. And I was surprised that she agreed to do it, given what I was mentioning earlier about her being very private prior to her passing, once she went over to Switzerland, living her life with her husband, and how everything, with Ike and what's love got to do with it, that I was thinking that, I don't want my stuff to be put out there again because it may rehash, some of the
Right.
things, that I went through. So I was surprised that she agreed to do that documentary. It was well done. And then of course
Mm-hmm.
the Tina Broadway musical, very, very well done as well from the clips that I did see.
Very smart businesswoman. She really had everything situated, selling her music catalog to BMG. The musical, I was there in 2019 when she was there that opening night, and I got to see her from very close up. And she didn't look well at all. She looked wonderful, but you could tell she was sick and had been through quite a bit. That was the last time I saw her.
Mm.
Yeah, wow, lots of memories.
Yeah, let's flash back to 1999.
Okay, in 1999, there was an organization in Jackson, Tennessee called the Southwest Tennessee Tourism Agency. They wanted a display along with the state of Tennessee to go in the rest stop between Jackson and Brownsville. So Sharon and I worked together and put a display together in a glass case, a 45 of Nutbush, and a picture of hers that hung in that rest stop. Then in 99, a Western Sizzling Steakhouse went out of business, and the city of Brownsville made it into the West Tennessee Delta Heritage Center. And that display that we hung in that rest stop moved to the Heritage Center and became the first display that was hanging there about Tina. So let's say from 1999 to 2012, not much happened with me. Uh, uh, Tina came back on tour in 2000. I went and saw that. She came back in 2008 with her 50th anniversary tour. Saw that. And then I was like, okay, that's pretty much it as far as music and touring. 2012 came, City of Brownsville announces that the school, Flag Grove, the actual school, the property owners were going to donate it to the City of Brownsville and move it from Nutbush to the Heritage Center. And it would become, refurbished, remodeled, and become the Tina Turner Museum. And I was like, yes, I didn't actually spearhead that, but I saw that vision up here and many other visions. I told people back then, one day there'll be a museum. What they do? A lot of them laughed at me, a lot of them agreed with me. But I said, just watch, it's coming. And it came in 2014. We had the grand opening. And she was not there, but she gave a speech to us on tape. And I was very well pleased to know that she made herself a museum and donated, a lot of her things there.
Yeah, and you answered my question right there. I was going to ask, did she donate any memorabilia from her personal collection towards the museum, or were most of it replicas?
What she did, most of everything you'll see in there is from the 2008-09 tour. Her costumes are from there. There's really not anything in there from any other period of her career except for the 2008-09 costumes. But it's very centered around that time period. There are some albums, gold albums in there of What's Love and Private Dancer, but it's like 70%, 08-09 things, and she donated. And she gave some money. I don't know how much, but the lady told me that's over it that she did donate some money toward it.
Yeah, that's great. And it's funny that you mentioned Western Sizzling and how it turned into the museum. If you're from the South, we would turn a defunct business into something else. What was a piece of it today will be a saving and loans company. What
Yeah,
was a hardware store will turn into your Dollar General tomorrow. And if you live in the South, there's a Dollar General just like a Baptist church on every corner.
that's right. By the way, what you're looking at behind me, you may not can see it all, but every February at the school during Black History Month, they always ask me to do the Tina part. So I put this poster together and it has two of her quotes back there. So I put it up there as a backdrop for the interview today.
Nice. And of course, June is Black Music Month, and how, like we mentioned earlier in the interview, how Black music is the cornerstone of, American music, even a genre that we don't really associate with Black people as country. Black people has played an important role in country, because if you go back to the history of the Appalachian Mountains and the surrounding areas, and how D. Ford Bailey was one of the first blacks to play at Grand Ole Opry. And now you have the likes of Reese Palmer, Mickey Guyton, Kane
Mm,
Brown, Jimmy Allen, of course, in
yeah.
the late Charlie Pride,
Oh, yeah.
all those guys are standing on his shoulders and those that came before him, to where, country is just not looked at as your grandma's granddaddy's country anymore, where it's just Loretta Lynn, Dolly, Hank Williams Sr., Tanya Tucker, what we would consider, country. And now country is mixing in pop, rap, R&B, and it's
Yeah.
great to see those lines being blurred now.
Yeah. I mean, when you get into talking about categorizing music, a lot of the artists like Diana Ross, Tina, they're more popular overseas than they are here. And they had to leave later in their career, so to speak, not maybe physically, but some physically, to get airplay and to get, people to come to their concerts and everything. Diana's been out on tour, but she It's primarily been overseas and in some just major cities along the coast here in the U.S. It's very sad to me to see some of the legends get shifted around like that, and then they don't get all of their goodies while they're here.
Yeah, I agree, because, overseas they have a greater appreciation and respect for the artist, the culture, because a lot of those acts from England, like the Rolling Stones, Beatles, Boy George, George Michael, all mention how they grew up listening to US R&B, and they're pretty much paying homage to that style with their appearance and their sound.
Right. So Tina just didn't fit she wouldn't fit in anybody's box, and look how far she got by not fitting in anybody's box. If she had limited herself to just R&B or just one genre, she wouldn't have been what she is today. She followed her heart,
Right.
stayed true to her path.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the hard won, because if you look at with social media and the internet, how it's pretty much shrunk the world, but it also made it easier to where when you find a niche, you can pretty much just market to that niche and make a comfortable living doing that. Almost kind of like how I mentioned earlier when the wrestling territories were regional. It kind of feels like that now, to where you don't have to appeal to the mainstream in order to survive anymore. You could just appeal to whoever your base is and just go with that.
Right. And so every year they have the Tina Turner Heritage Days out at the museum. That's the third or fourth weekend in September. And have you heard they're going to have a museum? Her house in Switzerland, they're going to
Oh,
turn that into a museum.
oh wow, that'll be something that they're gonna turn her house into a museum, almost kind of like how they did Paisley Park after Prince passed.
Yeah. And the city of Brownsville is talking about putting up a statue in honor of Tina. And if I may, I want to show you the front page of the Brownsville newspaper, Brownsville, Tennessee. And she made the front page.
Wow.
And
Tina simply
I
the
lived in
best.
Brownsville all my life. And I'll just be honest with you. I'm happy to see her on the front page, but I wish she'd gotten some bigger articles while she was living on the front page.
Yeah, that's how it goes, most times. Kind of like how when you see people at somebody's funeral or repast, where it's great to see you, but sad for the circumstances in which we had to see each other. Now I want to deviate really quick and go back to Memphis State for a minute.
Yeah.
Memphis State, now University of Memphis,
Mhm.
basketball, very well known. Of course, you have, Penny Hardaway, who's current coach, played ball at Memphis State when it was Memphis State. And then you had Coach Calipari for a minute, and he brought Derrick Rose and
Yeah.
those guys, and they made that run to the championship game in '08 before they lost to Kansas. And then DeJuan Wagner and a lot of other guys that will later become stars in the NBA. What do you think it is about University of Memphis and basketball that pretty much brings that city, together? Because you wouldn't think basketball in Tennessee would go together, because with it being the South, you would think football would be more dominant in Tennessee.
That's a tough one to answer, except to just say it's a basketball town. It's the only way I could answer that. And it just brings people together. It is weird, it is strange, like you're saying, but it's the electricity, the excitement, and you know, it's just one of those things. That's the only way I can explain that.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things indeed, and how the Grizzlies now ended up taking on that persona, and we're hoping that John Morant can get himself together and straighten out with all of his stuff that he has going on. So prayers up to Ja so that he can get himself right. But how before the Grizzlies came, you really want to think of basketball in Memphis, but once they came from Vancouver to Memphis, the city just embraced them, and the whole grit and grind era with Tony Allen, Zach Randolph, and Cow and all of those
Yeah.
guys from that era, and how now, of course, with Ja and those guys, they're pretty much carrying on that spirit of that group and pretty much staking their own identity. But I want to touch on this. How did you end up going into education from broadcasting? I'm just curious to know. Was it where you
Okay.
saw automation coming and you had enough, or you just wanted a career change?
When I was in the late 80s on the radio in Brownsville, my cousin was a principal at the elementary school, and they would need a sub every now and then, so they'd call me quite often. And about the mid 90s, when I was getting ready to depart radio, my mother had talked with me about life and about what was coming up in the future. And she said, you know, a disc jockey has to be willing to move all over the United States, and eventually you're going to get too old, and you're going to play out. So you need something else that you can lean on, that you like. And I didn't just buy that because she was pushing it. I thought about it and I said, okay, I do like teaching. I do like what I was doing at the time and still do mostly. I got to go ha ha right there. Okay. But I pushed on and decided I'd make a career out of it. So I went back to University of Memphis and got my master's in education and started teaching. Now, the way I got the job was, of course, having the degree, but they were having a Black History program at Lauderdale Middle School in Lauderdale County, which is next to Haywood. Sharon, the lady I worked with that I was telling you about, we were giving speeches. She was going to give a speech about, something. The mayor of Henning, where Alex Haley was from, was giving a speech. They had me on the program to give a speech about Tina. Got through with the speech. The principal walked up and says, when you get through, graduating, I'm going to hire you. So just throwing that in, it's like Tina always we had a little connection going like that. So that's how I got into education.
What was that first year like? Because I can tell you, my first year stepping into that classroom, I was like, I don't know what I am doing, especially when you get your IEP caseload.
Oh my goodness. You said the three letters there, didn't you? IEP.
IEP. Yes, and if you don't know what IEP is, that is individualized education. I get confused on the P. Is it program or plan?
Individual plan, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's planned too, and it is pretty much stating that your kid, if they are in special education, they have a right to FAPE, which is free, appropriate public education. And
Hmm.
this is the former teacher talking to y'all out there in
All right.
podcasting land and viewing land. I'm pointing at you, parents. You are the biggest advocate for your children. If
That's
there's
right.
anything wrong with your IEP, you can request a meeting at any time with the IEP team. You don't have to wait until your child's annual or until their reevaluation, which is typically every 3 years. I'm not sure if every other state does every 3 years for reevaluation, but you can request a meeting at any time, and it is for the benefit of your child to make sure they can be in the least restrictive environment or most restrictive environment that is conducive based on the service hours that your child may or may not need. And if they don't qualify for IEP services, then there's also Section 504.
Exactly. Yeah, it was. They don't train you as much for behavior as you would think they might. Well, at least they didn't then. So behavior was the big shock of the first year. As I remember it, learning how to deal with that and control that.
Ooh, yeah. The most of the kids I dealt with, they were all SLD.
Mm.
The behavioral kids, they were primarily more so close toward the administrative offices because of the meltdowns and blowups that they would have. And you got to make sure that you have the right people in place to do the proper restraints and all that when you're dealing kids that
Mm.
are maybe considered BD or ED.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like how in the days when I was in school, because I could remember where kids that weren't sped, they got pulled out to those little trailers in the back,
Yeah.
and they weren't included in general population. And it's good to see now kids and schools being more inclusive instead of just sticking the kids down in the basement on those trailers and pretty much saying, we're not going to include them and we're just going to leave them separately. So it's good to see that kids that are sped are being included now in general education classes. So that way that stigma can be destigmatized of being a kid in special ed.
Right. Lots of changes since the 70s. That's you talked about one of the biggest ones right there, the special ed laws.
Yeah, because prior to those laws getting passed, it was almost as if, you were non-existent, and this was back when the R word used to be used. Of course, we can't use
Oh
that
yeah.
now because that is politically incorrect. We've since evolved and became better as a society. And how I was looking at the documentary a couple years ago, Crip Camp, about the rise in the disability movement with people that have physical disabilities, and how it was during the 70s and the 80s during that movement in Northern California around Berkeley at Cal, how the seeds were planted then that later gave us the ADA Act of 1990, to where you see now accessible facilities and things for those that are physically disabled. I'm not sure if you can say handicapped now because I believe that's considered politically incorrect, but the physically disabled, and how, we've made strides overall to include others and not just have it be we're on this side, you're on this side. There's no mixing.
How many years did you stay in education?
For me, I was in for, I want to say, 3 years. I started out as an educational assistant, then ended up maybe about a year later enrolling in a master's program for my master's in education. Ended up teaching sped reading and writing for fifth graders, and then ended up getting out because, at the end of the day, I just really didn't have a strong passion and desire for it. But also, too, with the amount of work that teachers do, especially the extra stuff you have to do as a sped teacher, where you're expected to not only have your lesson plans, get ready for observation, make sure your students meet the data, the objectives when you do your quarterly testing, but also on top of that, you make sure your IEP caseload is good too. It's just a lot of the demands that sped teachers are asking for. And I remember one year I ended up dropping maybe $200-300 at an educational supply store getting things for my classroom. Then of course, if you're a teacher, you're not going to get reimbursed for that. You may get
Mhm.
lucky if you maybe get a quarter or something, but you're not getting reimbursed. Everything is coming out of your pocket. And I think that's why, sidebar, Abbott Elementary has been received so well, because it kind of putting the mirror up at the issues that's going on with our educational system in the US, and how teachers, for all the work that they do, the pay doesn't reflect it. And you're expected to wear many hats as a teacher. You're expected to be nurse, guidance counselor, friend, pastor, cafeteria, because some of these kids come from situations that, like, man, how do you make it? I had one student one time where I had some leftover breakfast cereals in my closet, and he was putting them in the backpack, and that kind of let me know maybe there's some food insecurity going on at home.
Yeah.
Where some kids having to get like a
Mhm.
weekend package of meals just to make it through the weekend, because school is the only time that they eat, and it's sad
Yeah.
when you have situations like that.
Well, you brought up a thought. I think that people that make laws about education, legislators, should be required to shadow a teacher for X amount of days, go through their daily life. And I think it'd be good for family members if, schools would set up some type of way where people could come and actually shadow, watch what the teachers actually do. It's one thing to tell what the teachers do, but when you see what they do, and then you see the amount of time they're having to spend after the bell rings, then you begin to understand how detailed and how much it takes to really do the job. But the
Yep.
people making the laws, a lot of the laws, they really don't have any business doing it, and they should have to go and watch what a teacher does in depth.
I would
That's just
say,
my.
yeah, I would say you teach for a day, you try writing a lesson plan, and let
Mm-hmm.
it be when you have a surprise observation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Boy,
And you go home and.
yeah, I made
Mhm.
sure that I was on top of my A game when I had a surprise observation, because I made sure to tell the kids, hey, I may be getting observed this week. So if y'all do this, and
Uh-huh.
this, I give
Pizza.
you X amount of time and free
Uh-huh.
time on the computer if y'all do good doing this observation, because
Yeah.
my contract renewal depends on that. That's another thing about teaching that they do not tell you. It is
Uh,
not like you are set, made in the shade. You
yeah.
can be asked, well, you didn't meet your numbers with testing, and we are not going to renew your contract for next school year. So you're on a contract by
Yeah.
contract basis. So you got to be putting out and performing, or else you getting cut.
And then when it's the observation's over, the kids say, "Did we do good?" And you say, "I don't know yet because I hadn't got back the results. I'll let you know what the results say." But you tell them that in a way, but it's always, I got to get the results back before I buy the pizza. I
Mm-hmm.
think you did good.
Yeah.
But like I say, the public really needs to not just hear, but be able to come in and watch and live in a teacher's shoes for 5 days. You know, see them go home with the papers and make the phone calls and all the meetings, and then let's talk about you making laws and so forth.
Right. And then if you know teachers, if you got anything to spare, if they have like something that they want to do for that classroom, give them a little something, because some teachers, because the pay's not glamorous, a lot of them have to moonlight with second jobs in order to supplement the teaching income. And some school districts in some parts of the US don't get paid during the summers. So some teachers have to get a summer job in order to keep themselves afloat until the school year. Thankfully, I worked in school districts where you got paid during the summer, but unfortunately, that's not the case, for all teachers. But I'm just saying that to say, be kind to a teacher, be nice to a teacher, and let them enjoy their summer vacation. Because
Amen.
I made sure when I was teaching, once that bell rang and I was outside them school walls,
Yeah.
if kids saw me, I'm like, I don't know you. We don't exist.
See you later,
We,
alligator.
you don't exist. When I go outside, when that last day of school hits, and we all do
Yes.
that teacher wave and say bye, have a
Uh-huh.
nice summer. It's almost like
Yeah.
when the cat's away, the mice will play.
And no squealing tires on the parking lot, right?
No, 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 no. Because I remember, when I was teaching chaperoning a field trip, and
Uh,
how, you know, now they have it set up where, if there's a child that may not be able to go, for financial reasons or whatever, what have you, they have scholarships now, to help kids, that would want to go on a field trip, but maybe for financial reasons or another couldn't go. Back in my day, it was where if your folks didn't have the money to go, you didn't go. And also,
yeah.
if you didn't have the money to go get something to eat, if the bus was going to stop at insert fast food restaurant here, you got whatever lunch that was packed in that white bag. It was ham and
Yeah.
cheese, a bologna and cheese, a carton of milk.
Yeah.
If you were really fancy, it was probably apple juice, but more than likely it was a carton of milk, either white or chocolate, and an apple. And I'm like,
Right.
Mama,
Gotta have that
make
apple.
sure you give me some money so that way
Uh-huh.
I can get insert fast food restaurant here, because I didn't want to be the only person eating that school lunch
Yeah.
on a field trip. Because to me, that was the height of the whole field trip. You got
Yeah.
your, got your $20. Like, man, I'm gonna get me a combo today. I'm not gonna get a Happy Meal no more. You walk up to the counter proudly with your 19-year-old self, like, let me get the number one.
Yeah.
How do you want it? Super size.
Yes.
And you proudly give the $20 bill. You go with your tray, you smiling, walking, having a good time, like everything all right. And you really was doing something if you went to a buffet doing a school field trip. And now, if you're from the South, you know these three buffet places well. Shoney's, breakfast buffet, top
Yeah,
tier, the French toast sticks, don't at me, at your mama. Old
I
Country
know about
Buffet,
Shoney's.
Old Country Buffet. I never
Yeah.
had Old Country Buffet, but I always heard good things about it. And number 3, Ryan's Steakhouse.
Oh yeah.
Ryan's Steakhouse. There was a Ryan's Steakhouse in my hometown. It's since been converted into a Sheetz gas station, and
Yeah.
how it was the go-to spot after church, that go to corral and assert your local barbecue spot. And how, the desserts were always warm and fresh. The meat bar was always placed correctly, and how you knew it was going to be good if you knew a certain cook was going to be working. Just like how when you would go to your local Waffle House after midnight and you knew that they were shorthanded that day, that your food was going to be okay because they were shorthanded and the sanitation grade was below 80.
Yeah, they did away with the Ryans around these parts and Shoney's. And when the pandemic hit, they're closed. There were only 2 here in Memphis, and they're both closed. I really missed the Shoney's. That was some good eating.
Yeah,
So,
Shoney's was top tier because we had one in my hometown. We would go there for the breakfast buffet. But when I went to Tennessee a couple of years ago, I saw a Ryan Steakhouse out in Seaverville, Tennessee, which is in eastern Tennessee, which is over by Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, aka Dolly Parton neck of the woods. And how, it was like childhood memory unlocked, and how, man, I could just remember spending so many Sundays and family gatherings at Ryan's, and how, being from the South, you and I, we can both relate how being from the South and being a Southerner, you get a true sense of comfort, in a lot of things because, some places in the South is all about community, all about togetherness, close knit, and how, with the movement that you started that led to the Tina Turner Museum, is all about community and wanting to show love to one of their very own.
yeah, and just let me encourage everybody, no matter what your dream is, follow your heart, because that's what happened to me. I didn't listen to the negatives. I had a lot of people just, give me up as a friend and, write me off as crazy with some of my dreams. But I stayed true to my heart. And so whatever your dream is out there, whatever you're trying to do, search your heart, follow your heart. Because after all, it's going to be you that has to live with your heart in the end anyway. So that's really important. That's critical.
Right. And before we conclude the interview, do you have any shout outs, thank yous you want to give, and also plug where people can find more information about the museum or the Tina Turner fan club?
Yeah, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Rashawn up in New York for hooking us up and everything. I want to thank all the people that will listen to the interview. And what was that you were asking me? Something else there.
So plug where folks can find more information about the Tina Turner Museum and also the Tina Turner fan club that you have on Facebook if they want to
Okay, the Tina
join and
Turner
follow.
fan club that I have on Facebook is called Tina Turner Fans, Nutbush, Tennessee, Haywood County chapter. Tina Turner Fans, Nutbush, Haywood County, Tennessee chapter. You can also follow my personal Facebook wall, Keith Alton, Alton Gambill. I post a lot of Tina things on there. You can go to West Tennessee Delta Heritage Center FB page and Tina Turner Museum FB page. Those are just a few of the places to go.
All right. And you can catch this interview wherever you stream podcasts and also on YouTube at youtube.com/beyond the album cover. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big thank you and a big round of applause for Mr. Keith Gambill for coming on to Beyond the Album Cover. Keith, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on and look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
I thank you and look forward to talking to you too as well, Jarrell. Thank you.
Yes, sir.